Dear Bode, nearly 7 years ago, at the perfect hour of 3:05 a.m., you arrived on this 4.5 billion-year-old planet and soaked in your first precious seconds.
Is your light on accident? Are you good or do you need me to?
12 hours and 14 minutes later on that same day, I pushed record on my phone and took a video that is, to this day, my favorite video or photo that I have ever taken.
Really?
Okay.
Let me put down the teddy bear.
You gotta be oh so gentle, okay? Oh, what do you think?
Maya, look at Daddy.
Cheese.
She's being so careful.
Bode, your entrance into the world forever changed our family for the better. And on behalf of the whole family, we are deeply grateful God gave us the gift of you as a son, as a brother, and as a grandson. Who you are is such a tremendous gift to all of us that we celebrate your official entrance into our family every year with fire, cake, and song.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bode. Happy birthday to you. Okay, make a wish. Close your eyes, make a wish. Okay.
On this coming Tuesday, our family is getting together once again. We will take another video of you as we pull out a cake, light some candles, and sing happy birthday to you for the 7th time. Happy birthday, Bode. I must confess that one of the highest honors of my life is being your father. I use the word honor intentionally because as your dad, I hold courtside season tickets to the holy onslaught of epics which compose the story of your beautiful life. And one of the main ways I express gratitude for this extraordinary honor is by writing a letter to you on your birthday every year. Over the last 6 letters, we discussed what it means to trust the gospel promise, to do not be afraid, to participate in the brave act of hope, to find joy even with declining mental health, to love life even in the face of a global pandemic, to hold compassion for the person next to you, and to celebrate, in a good way, what it means to be a man. Each of these letters revolved around the memories we cherish from the previous year and the delicate optimism that we carry for the year to come, the enigma of our shared humanity, and because you were only born 13 days prior to December 25, the ancient miracle of Christmas. And this year, on your 7th birthday, I want to start with the Christmas story. But not just any Christmas story, Bode. I want to start with the most bizarre Christmas story in the Bible. You see, in the Bible, there are 4 separate accounts of the life of Jesus. Whenever someone wants to read the Christmas story, they frequently turn to the Gospel of Luke. Here we are told about the journey to Bethlehem, the inn, the stable, the manger, the birth, the angels, and the shepherds. If we turn over to the Gospel of Matthew, the birth story of Jesus occupies less than half a sentence. In the next chapter, Matthew then tells us about sages from the east who visited Jesus and bring him gifts of frankincense, myrrh, and gold. For readers who are looking for a more poetic record of the birth of Christ, John metaphorically tells us that the essence of God, which existed since the dawn of time, became flesh and walked among us. And then there's Mark's gospel, which begins in verse 1, and then 9 verses later, Jesus shows up as a fully fledged adult and receives baptism from a desert hippie named John. Bode, I remember the first time I noticed this a few years ago. I went back to the beginning of Mark to see if I missed the Christmas story, and I read the opening verse once again. Here begins the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, I send my messenger before you to prepare your way, a herald's voice in the desert crying, make ready the way of our God, clear a straight path. After this reference from Isaiah, Mark then tells us about John's wilderness baptisms of forgiveness, then John's wardrobe, and then John's diet. And then fully fledged adult Jesus shows up and participates in the baptism from John, which is bizarre because Mark, who dedicated a significant portion of his life to telling the world about the story of Jesus, seemingly felt that the entire Christmas story was better off as a deleted scene. In fact, Mark felt it was more pertinent for us to know about the materials of John's clothes than it was for us to know about the manger, the sages, and the metaphors of Christmas. And while the bizarre nature of this omission may turn some away, the great mentors in my life have taught me to lean into the bizarre and develop a higher tolerance for the weird, because that's usually where the inspiration resides. Leaning in, the closest we get to a Christmas story from this gospel, are these 28 words from the prophet Isaiah, which raises the question, why did these old words from Isaiah matter to Mark? Isaiah's words can be found in chapter 40, verse 3 of that book. Upon hearing these numbers, alarm bells should go off in our head, because the book of Isaiah holds a dramatic shift from chapter 39 to chapter 40 in its weathered pages. So much so that many scholars, including the great Marvin Sweeney, teach us that Isaiah is not a literary monolith, but is instead 3 separate works with similar theological themes composed by multiple authors. Today we call these 3 separate works 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Isaiah, with 2nd Isaiah beginning at chapter 40 and 3rd Isaiah beginning at chapter 55. The reason we must keep these books separate is because they discuss theological questions related to 3 distinct time periods in Judah's history. 1st Isaiah talks about the events in the 8th century BCE, while 2nd and 3rd Isaiah talk about events 200 years later. These eras shaped the questions that each of these distinct writings sought to answer. Chapter 40, then, is the very beginning of 2nd Isaiah, and it was written probably sometime around the year 535 BCE. This context changes the way we read Isaiah and the way we read the Gospel of Mark. Because 50 years before 2nd Isaiah was written, the nation of Judah, with its capital city of Jerusalem, lived with fear in the shadow of the empire of Babylon. These fears manifested into a reality in the year 586 BCE when Babylon unleashed military fury on Jerusalem, laid waste to the city, and took whatever survivors were left back with them to Babylon. These invaders forced the people of Judah to live in exile, where the Babylonians assumed assimilation would wipe out their culture, wipe out their way of life, wipe out their history, and wipe out their religion. Initially, there was hope among the people of Judah as they lived in exile. They trusted that God would hear their cries and liberate them with a mighty hand. But then weeks in exile became months in exile. Months became years, and then years became decades. Until 47 years later, the most unexpected event occurred. A new empire, Persia, led by a man named Cyrus, rose from the east, attacked Babylon, and conquered the dominant empire. The Persians then liberated the people of Judah and told them they were free to return home. Rejoicing, the people of Judah did just that. They journeyed back across the desert and returned to their homeland after nearly 5 decades in exile. As you can imagine, after the initial celebrations, awkward reunions, and readjustments to a long dormant home, the people of Judah looked at each other and asked the greatest theological question known to humankind: what on earth just happened? Remember, this story occurred before the scientific method could explain how the world worked, before the internet could inform people across the globe about current events, and before a library could be visited to gain a larger understanding of history. But even if the people of Judah could receive clear answers to these questions, the most confusing part of the whole story for them wasn't so much the liberation as it was who did the liberating. Because if God truly wanted to liberate her people, then God should have used a direct descendant of David to rise up and conquer the Babylonians. But instead, an unknown Gentile from a place called Persia assumed the role of what should have been David's descendant and brought salvation to the people of Judah. And so the theological questions poured in as people asked, was Cyrus sent by God to liberate us? And why wouldn't God liberate us with a descendant of David? And then the most difficult question of all, how do we know God sent Cyrus as opposed to Cyrus's liberation being an act of random chance? And while our modern society often thinks religious deconstruction is a new idea in human history, This story kindly nudges us out of our own heads and our own experience. As long as there has been religion, there has also been deconstruction. And every generation has their own deconstruction story. With these questions hanging in the air, the author of 2nd Isaiah sat down to write words which would eventually be canonized as holy. The author believed the liberation, even from the unlikely source of King Cyrus, was a clear and direct action from God. And in their writing, made that belief known up front by declaring God's voice said to this author, "Speak tenderly to Jerusalem's heart and tell it that its time of service is ended, that its iniquity is atoned for, that it has received from Yahweh's hand double punishment for all its sins." And then we read the words that Mark would later quote, "A voice cries out, clear a path through the wilderness for Yahweh, make a straight road through the desert for our God." Over the next 14 chapters, then, the author gives 5 supporting arguments for why they believe that this action was an action directly from God, and how the reader can also trust this liberation as divine. The author asks the reader to consider the wonder of creation, and then the beauty of humanity, which is fascinating because modern readers often consider humanity during this author's time to be barbaric. The author then challenges the reader to remember the story of their people's redemption and goes on to discuss the beauty of liberation as it unfolded in their collective story. And then they wrap all of this up by pointing to the fact that their presence in Jerusalem was a testament to God's restoration. And while someone today may point out, these 5 ideas seem flimsy arguments to the question about random chance or divine intervention, a more compelling approach for me to 2nd Isaiah is to ask the question here. Why does it matter to this author whether this liberation was the result of God's action or random chance? And while you may have a different answer than me, Bode, the best answer I can come up with to this question is this: because if God intervened, then life is good. Now, I need to take a moment and explicitly state that this answer is not a comment on atheism or agnosticism. Bode, some of my best friends today are atheists and agnostics, and without any belief in a higher power or divine intervention, they still have found that this life is good. And while this author needed divine intervention to make peace with the imperfections of the human condition, not everyone you meet will need that same reassurance. But at the same time, this writer lived 2,500 years ago, and in the face of uncertainty, asked the people around them to embrace the beauty of creation, humanity, redemption, liberation, and restoration, and trust that life is good. Now, about 600 years after 2nd Isaiah was written, a person who we refer to as Mark sat down somewhere and began to write the story of Jesus Christ. We do not know if Mark was aware of the angels, the sages, the shepherds, the manger, the inn, or even the parents of Jesus. But we do know that when Mark was trying to explain what Jesus meant to him and to the world at large, he invited the reader to go back to a time from centuries ago when people were questioning whether or not this life was a curse or a gift. Mark quotes an author from an era who understood the suffering of the world, but also considered all of the creation, humanity, redemption, liberation, and restoration, and saw and embraced God in all of it, and felt that this life was truly good. I know Mark's gospel is a bizarre Christmas story. There's a part of me that will always be drawn to the traditional framings around Christmas in the Gospel of Luke. But Bode, Mark captures the essence of the Christmas story by quoting an author from long ago who, even in the face of suffering, still trusted that life is good. And when trying to describe the significance of Jesus Christ, Mark looked back centuries in the past and remembered the words from the book of Isaiah. And Mark's bizarre Christmas story declares the same thing that Isaiah declared so long ago. Basically, it's happening again. God is moving. God is alive, and life is good. And the reason this matters to me is because I used to believe that God was so much better, so much more generous, and so much more alive during biblical times. I read about God feeding the hungry with manna from the sky, and commanding physics to part the sea, and igniting altars with fireballs from heaven, and angels declaring the birth of a baby, and Jesus raising people from the dead. And I thought, man, God was so good. I wish I was born back at biblical times so I could see the work of God for myself. But Mark's bizarre Christmas story and Isaiah's heartfelt witness call me back to the present, and they invite me to wake up and see that the work of God didn't just happen. The work of God is still happening, and it's happening all around me, and to trust that this work is in fact good. Now, I know this is a long intro, Bode, but this story reminds me of you. For 7 years now, I have called you my son. I've watched you grow and move and laugh and dance and cry and persevere. And as I feel the weight of each of these beautiful memories, and I consider Mark's Christmas story, I want you to know something. What I admire most about you, Bode, is your heart. Now, Merriam-Webster defines heart as the emotional or moral nature of a human being, as distinguished from the intellectual one, such as compassion, love, courage, or enthusiasm. The great Brené Brown once said this: courage is from the Latin word cor, meaning heart, and the original definition of courage was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And when this idea from Dr. Brown was recently shared with me, I thought of you, Bode, because even at the age of 7, you tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. Now, a cynic may read this letter and scoff at the idea that a 7-year-old possesses an admirable heart. After all, the phrase "take heart" is a phrase about human resiliency, encouraging the hearer to trust that things will be better soon. This implies suffering is necessary to be a person with an admirable heart. And there is some merit to the cynic's objection. After all, even after 7 years, Bode, you have not suffered much. As parents, your mom and I have tried our best to make sure you experience as little suffering as possible in your childhood. But our protection will one day run out, and your heart will be tested as you encounter inexplicable suffering. And as much as I may wish for this to never happen to you, this is the nature of what it means to be human. And so I would acknowledge the objection from the cynic, but then I would give that cynic a look and lean in close and say, but come on, you have no idea how big this kid's heart is. Then I would proceed to tell them stories from your 7th year of life. This year, you gave your whole heart away to 2 stories as told in film: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, and Super Mario Brothers, the movie. The fact that you love these new movies is not an accident, because the movie studios are attempting to capitalize on my nostalgia as a parent to bring you to these movies. Because, Bode, when I was your age, I fell in love with 2 movies too: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, The Secret of the Ooze, and Super Mario Brothers. Not as good as the one that you've seen. While the movie franchises have stayed the same, the movie theaters have changed dramatically. Now, you run into the theater and fully recline to take all the stress you feel off your weary 7-year-old shoulders. And I remember, as the lights went down and Super Mario Brothers was about to start, you tapped me on the shoulder. I leaned in close, and Bode, you whispered, "Dad, I think this is going to be the best movie ever." And then about 100 minutes later, as the lights came up, you tapped me on the shoulder without missing a beat and said, "Dad, that was the best movie ever." Around the time this movie arrived in theaters, you also crossed the magical 4-foot-tall threshold, which opened up all kinds of options for you, like driving your own go-kart at K1 speed in Ontario. A few months ago, we headed out to that track with a few friends. We strapped a helmet on your head, buckled your harness, and you took off. Now, full transparency, Bode, I expect you to crash into every wall on the course. So I held my breath as I imagined paying the owners for repairs to their go-kart and their track. But then this happened. Yeah, buddy! Woo! You surprised me. You drove so well. I guess we can tell Mom that all that time playing Mario Kart has been worthwhile. During our time at the track, I captured a picture of you that I truly love. Speaking of pictures, you also started this annoying habit of taking selfies whenever your mom or I leave our phone unattended on a table. I say annoying because you always take selfies and never a selfie. As I scroll through my Photos app, you occupy rows upon rows with these ridiculous faces, and I don't have the heart to delete any of them. And these faces that you make also make regular appearances in pictures with your friends, as you can see in this one as well. This year, you gave your heart away to sports, and it was a bit of a sad experience for me. Since your birth, I have tried with everything I have to get you to be a Denver Broncos fan with me. We bought you a Broncos onesie, we dressed you up in a micro jersey, and we made you wear a Broncos tank top. But then your cousin, Jake, who you've been friends with and turtles with ever since you were born, recently announced that he was a Los Angeles Rams fan, and then you followed suit and said you loved the Rams as well. At first, I thought it was a phase. But then you continued to ask your mom and me to take you to a Rams game and insisted that you were a real Rams fan. In frustration, I asked you to name just one player on the Rams to prove you were a fan. And without hesitation, you said, Cooper Kupp, Dad. At that point, I knew it was over. But why fight it when you love it? Not too long after, we surprised you with tickets and drove down to SoFi Stadium in Inglewood. As we walked into the stadium, you kept saying, Dad, I'm so scared. I am so scared. And I asked you why. And you said, I don't want the Rams to lose. To which I said, welcome to the life of a sports fan, Bode. It's a bumpy ride filled mostly with disappointment. When the game started, you lost your mind, Bode. On an excitement scale of 1 to 10, you clocked in at a solid 17. I don't think I have ever seen your heart cheer so hard and so loud. You lived at that level for 37 minutes, but football games last for 3 hours. And by the fourth quarter, you had no energy left to give.
Buddy, how you doing, buddy? Did you like that big stop?
The Rams won by 1 point on a missed Seahawks field goal as time expired. I told you that you should quit sports now while you're ahead because it probably wouldn't get any better than this. But you gave your heart away to this football team, and now you ask us to turn on the Rams game every Sunday. You understand about 12% of what's going on, but you give 100% effort in the way you cheer them on, and that's what I admire about you. I also saw your heart up close on a trip that happened by accident. Our family of 4 was supposed to go on a road trip together this summer, but then Mom's job changed and she could no longer join us for the trip. So Maya, you and me set off on a road trip for a week through the states of Oregon, Nevada, and California. We rafted on white water, explored Lassen National Park, survived plunging water slides, relaxed in Mammoth Lakes, and spent the day in a family-friendly city of Reno, Nevada. After a full day of fun in the sun and great behavior from all 3 of us, I treated us to a reward at the Exotic Milkshake Bar and ordered their premium cookies and cream milkshake for all 3 of us to share. Now, I'm not sure what premium means in this case, but from what I gather, it's something along the lines of the absolute most saturated fat possible in one milkshake. And when making this milkshake, they cram as much of said saturated fat inside the cup, and then when they run out of room in the cup, they smear frosting around the outside of the cup and sprinkle it with Oreo crumbles to make sure no empty space goes to waste. This exterior speckling on the cup led to some unorthodox culinary sights as we tried to partake in this premium milkshake.
Hold on, wait. Okay,
Me?
go.
Like the side? Bode, it's my my turn. Hey.
And Bode, the sugar rush led to an unencumbered dance session in the Exotic Milkshake Bar's front window. I imagine parents walking by the Exotic Milkshake Bar and thinking to themselves, what kind of dad orders their kid a premium cookies and cream milkshake? To which my response would be the best and the worst kind of dad. And then I would tell them my church's name is Paradox. I can't believe how lucky I was to go on this trip with you two. I love seeing your face light up at the new experiences that you both enjoyed. This trip brought the summer to a close, and in August, you stepped back into school and started the first grade. First grade brought with it a new set of challenges for you, including spelling tests. These tests require you to study for the first time in your life. And I studied with you and was impressed by your grace and humility as you expanded your knowledge. Spell cat.
T-A-T.
Correct. Last year, you began playing the drums. And while you started with a lot of energy and passion, I noticed early on this year that you dreaded practicing more and more with each passing day. However, you began to show interest in the guitar. And the first time I noticed this interest is when you grabbed a spatula from the kitchen, turned on some music, and started, quote, rocking out.
Five golden rings, 4 colors, 3 branches, 2 to the dark, and a tree, a tree.
Because of your passionate heart, we pulled out your 3-string toy guitar, and I taught you how to play a song by one of my favorite bands of all time. Once you learned that song, you couldn't put the guitar down. I mean, you walked everywhere in the house playing that riff as many times as you could, including the most private spaces in our home. We talked with you about switching instruments, and after several hours of practice on the toy guitar, we bought you a brand new Ibanez micro bass in your custom color of choice, Bode Blue. We took this picture 8 months ago, and since then, you put in hours and hours and hours of practice on the bass. And as hard as it is to believe, next week here at Paradox Church, you'll be playing bass on stage for the first time as part of the praise band. And your excitement about playing is contagious. Last week on a connection card, you wrote a prayer request which read, "I'm so excited to join the band. Can you pray for me?" Bode, I want you to know, before you step on stage, no matter how well you play, no matter how many mistakes you make, or write notes you play, I just want you to know I'm proud of you, because you practiced hard, and you did your absolute best to get ready for this moment next week. And the drive you felt to keep practicing and working and dreaming toward playing in the band originated from your remarkable heart. About 2 months ago, after putting you to bed, I walked into my bedroom and saw a note waiting for me on my pillow. Now, I was surprised to see this note. It wasn't my birthday. I had not bought anyone anything recently. It was just a regular and random Friday in the middle of October. Your mom was gone on a trip, so it was just Maya, you, and me at the house. I opened the envelope and pulled out a letter written from you. It read, "Dad, you are the best dad I can ever have. Dad, you are making the best sermons." From Bode. Considering last year you wrote a Christmas card to Mom and me that read, "Mom and Dad, give me more present and I will give you yours. Love, Bode." This is a significant improvement, my son. Now, I called your mom to tell her about this letter and, to brag to her that I got a letter and she didn't. But after telling her the news, she said, "Well, Bode snuck a letter into my suitcase before I left." And the letter said, "Mom, I hope you have a great trip. Mom, you are the best mom ever. From Bode." I know, right? Bode, your mom and I love and admire your generous, passionate, and sincere heart. At the age of 7, you are a good and loving person. You are more than enough. And you are worthy of every ounce of love your mom, your grandparents, your sister, your family, your friends, and I can give you. I wanted to tell you the Christmas story and celebrate your heart and tell you how much we love you on your 7th birthday, because your mom and I want you to live with the conviction that this life is a gift. There are a number of reasonable and well-thought-out objections to anyone who says you shouldn't participate in organized religion. These arguments are so strong that I do not blame anyone for saying they'd rather not expose themselves or their children to religion. But your mom and I intentionally and carefully chose to raise you in this tradition. Not because we're worried about your eternal salvation or because we want you to be more correct in your thoughts about God. Rather, we want you to trust that your story, your identity, your essence, and your heart are all grounded in the love of your Creator. When you trust this love, you are following the footsteps of 2nd Isaiah and Mark. And I believe this trust will lead you to see that this life is in fact good. We want your heart to continue to love with reckless abandon. And while suffering will eventually find its way into your life, I have seen the beauty of your remarkable heart that I am confident you can find a way to rise above the pain when that day arrives. The wisdom of 2nd Isaiah is not, this is how you avoid suffering. Rather, the wisdom of 2nd Isaiah is, this is how you can trust that life is good, even with suffering. Remember, the author encourages us to get outside, look at nature, enjoy it, and appreciate it. The author encourages us to embrace humanity and learn to love who you are while also learning to love who others are. The author tells us that while the news will always prioritize stories of fear and sensationalism, stay grounded. Pay attention to the stories of redemption that are happening around you, and frequently discuss these stories with your friends and your family. Consider how lucky you are to live in a time when you are free. Work to extend that liberation to others, the author encourages us. And lastly, the author says, when suffering does arrive at your doorstep, stay connected to others. Your best friends will become the ones who stay with you in your pain. And then when things have improved, remember the restoration you've experienced and tell yourself and others about it. This is the wisdom of 2nd Isaiah, recognized as a present reality in the Christmas story by the Gospel of Mark, and still alive today as you celebrate on your 7th birthday. And I would add, through all of these 5 different ideas, always trust your heart, Bode. Your heart is your strength, and your mother and I believe that you will find joy, beauty, and happiness in this life as you seek to tell a story of who you are with your whole heart. I want to wrap this letter up by talking to you about life through the metaphor of snow skiing. Because this year, a couple things happened that I never would have predicted at this time last year. The first is that Mammoth Mountain, our home mountain, received the most snowfall in recorded history. And the second is your attitude entirely changed about skiing. Rather than me prodding you to get your ski clothes on and get ready to go, you could not wait to get out on the mountain this year. Your heart fell in love with the adventure of snow skiing. And while this was exciting for me, the surprise of the story resides in the fact that you wanted to ski no matter what the conditions were. Was it blowing 22 miles an hour with low visibility and snow falling at a nearly horizontal angle? Yes, you still wanted to go skiing. What if the temperature was dropping and our fingers and toes were feeling frozen? Then yes, you still wanted to go skiing. And with this season in particular, there was more than enough classically defined bad ski days that we knew what to do with. I point this out because snow skiing, like any other sport, is a microcosm of the full human experience. Every time you said yes to skiing on a bad day, you opened yourself to the joy of skiing. But also, you opened yourself to the discomfort of cold, the wind, the low light, and the pain of a hard fall. Would it be easier for you to stay inside and avoid skiing? Of course it would. But you might miss out on a great ski day, even in bad conditions. Or you might miss out on skiing with your friends on a really bad day and the strange joy that comes with remembering the misery that we all endured together. If the skiing represents joy and the bad weather represents suffering, then the yes you give to going out that day is your heart, Bode. And what I admire most about you is your heart. Bode, your mother and I hope you continue to say yes with your enormous heart. We hope this tradition helps you to see this life as a holy and sacred gift. We hope Isaiah's wisdom is helpful for you when you are unsure of this life. We hope this Christmas story, even the most bizarre version, brings you comfort. And we hope you find an abundance of joy in this life filled with love and risk, even as you endure the snowstorms that come your way. Happy birthday, Bodes, and Merry Christmas. Thank you for being the best son I could ever ask for. May the age of 7 be good to you, and may you always know I love you with my whole heart. With love, Dad.
Thank you.